Officer Darren Klein had worked for the small-town police department for nearly 10 years. He was proud of his badge and the power it gave him. To Darren, the badge was a shield, one that made him untouchable. In his mind, it gave him the right to decide who was guilty and who was innocent, no questions asked. On a warm spring afternoon, Darren sat in his patrol car near the edge of town, eyes scanning the road. He was looking for something to give him a reason to stop a driver. It was one of those slow days, and he wanted to prove he was doing his job. Suddenly, he noticed a sleek black car driving past the speed limit. Darren's heart raced with excitement. He flicked on his siren and pulled the car over. The driver, Jamal Turner, was calm as he pulled over to the side of the road. Jamal was a tall, well-dressed man in his mid-30s. He wore a clean white shirt and black pants. His hair was neat, and his eyes showed intelligence and calmness. Darren approached the car with a cold look on his face. "License and registration," he said sharply. Jamal reached into his pocket and handed over the documents without a word. Darren looked at the papers, then at Jamal, his eyes narrowing. He had stopped many drivers before, but there was something different this time. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked. "No, officer," Jamal answered politely. "You were speeding," Darren said. "Also, this car matches the description of a vehicle involved in a drug deal last week." Jamal blinked in surprise. "I don't know anything about that," he said calmly. "I've never been involved in anything illegal." Darren's face grew harder. He didn't want to listen. He believed that if someone looked like Jamal, they must be guilty. It was a thought he had learned long ago, and he never questioned. "Step out of the car," Darren ordered. Jamal obeyed without protest. Darren began to search the vehicle. He opened the trunk, looked under the seats, and checked every corner. But he found nothing. "Do you mind if I search you?" Darren asked. Jamal nodded, understanding he had little choice. Darren patted him down, but found no weapons, no drugs, nothing illegal. Still, Darren wasn't satisfied. "You're coming with me," he said. "We need to figure out what you're hiding." Jamal was shocked. "I've done nothing wrong," he said quietly. But Darren didn't listen. He handcuffed Jamal and put him in the back of his patrol car. As Darren drove to the police station, Jamal sat silently. He was angry, but he kept his feelings inside. He had been stopped before, but never treated like this. He wondered what would happen next. At the station, Darren booked Jamal, took photos and fingerprints, and began writing the report. He wrote everything he wanted to be true, not what really happened. "Good job, Darren," his partner said as he left the room. Darren smiled proudly. He believed he had caught a criminal. But outside, Jamal's phone buzzed. His sister had seen the arrest and was worried. She sent messages to their family telling them what happened. Jamal's friend, Maya, a local journalist, received a video of the arrest taken by a bystander. She watched it carefully. Something about Darren's behavior didn't seem right. Maya decided to reach out to Jamal once he was released. Meanwhile, Darren went home that night feeling powerful. He didn't think about the man he had arrested or the consequences, but Jamal's story was just beginning. The morning sun spilled gently through the tall windows of the courthouse. The old building stood quietly in the center of town, its walls holding years of stories, some of justice, some of pain. Today, the air inside was heavy with a new kind of tension. Jamal Turner walked into the courthouse with calm steps. He was dressed neatly in a dark suit and tie. His face showed no fear, only quiet determination. This was not the first time he had been here, but today was different. He was here for a court hearing, but not just as a defendant. Jamal was a lawyer, a good one. He had worked hard to become that, going to one of the best law schools in the country and fighting for justice for years. Now, he had come back to his hometown for something very personal. When Jamal was arrested weeks ago by Officer Darren Klein, the whole town had whispered and talked. Many people believed Darren, the policeman who had served the town for years. But others saw the video, a bystander's recording that showed something very different. Inside the courtroom, Judge Harris prepared for the session. He was an older man with silver hair and a stern face. He had known Darren Klein for many years. They had worked together, trusted each other. Now he was about to face a case that could change everything. As Jamal took his seat, the room filled with curious eyes. People murmured softly. Who was this man? Calm and collected. And what would he say? Darren Klein walked in, his face set, in a confident smile. He still believed his badge made him untouchable. He had done this many times before. Arrested people and won in court without much trouble. He looked at Jamal with a mix of surprise and irritation. How could this man stand? So tall after being arrested? The bailiff called the court to order, and the hearing began. Jamal stood up first. His voice was clear and strong, easy to understand. Your Honor, I am here today not just to answer the charges against me, but to show the truth behind the arrest. I was stopped and taken into custody without cause. This was an act of racial profiling and abuse of power. The judge listened carefully. Darren shifted in his seat, his confident smile fading slightly. Jamal continued, I am also an attorney, Your Honor. I have studied the law, and I know that what happened to me was wrong. I am ready to present evidence and witnesses that will prove this. Darren's lawyer objected quickly. Your Honor, this is an open and shut case. Officer Klein followed procedure. The defendant was speeding and driving a vehicle connected to illegal activity. We asked the court to dismiss these claims. Judge Harris nodded but did not make a decision. He wanted to hear more. The courtroom waited as Jamal called his first witness, Maya, the journalist who had seen the video of the arrest. Maya took the stand nervously but with courage. I recorded the arrest on my phone, she said. From what I saw, Officer Klein acted aggressively without reason. Jamal was calm and cooperative the entire time. The judge watched the video that Maya played. It showed Darren's harsh words, the quick escalation, and Jamal's calm refusal to resist. Next, Jamal presented character letters from people in the community. Neighbors, former teachers, even some local business owners. All spoke about Jamal's good heart and honesty. They also shared stories of other times Darren had been too harsh with black citizens. The courtroom murmured. The case was no longer simple. Darren looked frustrated. He stood to speak again. This man is trying to destroy my career with lies. I did what I thought was right to protect this town. Jamal answered softly. Protecting the town does not mean harming innocent people. Judge Harris asked both sides to present all evidence and adjourned the court for the day. The hearing was only the beginning, but it already felt like a turning point. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, asking questions. Maya spoke clearly to the crowd. This case is about more than one man. It's about the rights of everyone in our town. Jamal smiled briefly at Maya. He was tired but hopeful. Later that evening, Jamal sat in his small apartment. He stared at the letter he had received, the court summons. It was strange to see his name there, not as a lawyer for someone else, but as the person who had been arrested. He thought about his childhood here. Growing up, he had loved this town, the parks, the schools, the people. But he also remembered the hard moments, the silent looks, the unfair treatment. He had left to study law to fight those unfair moments. Now, it seemed, he had to fight. Again. Jamal knew this case would be difficult. Darren Klein was well-known, well-connected. Many people still trusted the police officer without question, but Jamal also knew that truth could not stay hidden forever. He opened his laptop and began preparing. He read over laws about racial profiling, police misconduct, and civil rights. He practiced his speech for court. He called some community members who wanted to help. Meanwhile, Darren sat at his kitchen table drinking coffee. He was angry. How could Jamal, a man he thought was just another suspect, turn the tables on him? Darren was sure his badge would protect him. He had done this many times before. But deep down, Darren felt a small knot of worry. The media attention, the witnesses, Jamal's calm confidence. It was all new to him. As night fell, the town buzzed with whispers. People talked about the case over dinner tables in churches and at local stores. Some stood by Darren, believing the police officer was doing his job. Others felt uneasy, wondering if this time justice might finally be served. Jamal looked out his window at the quiet street. The fight was far from over, but he felt ready. He whispered to himself, "This time, the truth will win." Jamal Turner sat at his kitchen table, the soft light of the evening lamp casting a warm glow over his hands as he carefully folded a letter. It was from his mother, who was sick and living alone in the same small town. The letter was full of love and hope, but Jamal felt a heaviness in his chest. The past weeks had been difficult, and he knew the fight ahead would not be easy. For Jamal, this town was both home and heartbreak. He thought back to his childhood, growing up in the very neighborhood where the police had stopped him weeks ago. It had been a place filled with laughter, friends, and family, but also marked by silent struggles. Jamal remembered the way the other kids played freely in the streets, while he often noticed the wary looks from police officers. He remembered the warnings his parents gave him, how to behave, how to stay safe, how to avoid trouble even when he did nothing wrong. His father had died when Jamal was young, and his mother worked long hours to support the family. Jamal was the oldest of 3 siblings. He took care of his younger sister and brother, helping with homework and making sure they stayed out of harm's way. Even in school, Jamal faced challenges. Some teachers praised his intelligence, but others seemed to expect less from him because of his skin color. He worked twice as hard, determined to prove that he belonged. When he graduated high school, Jamal left the town for college. He won a scholarship to a prestigious university far away. It was there that he found his passion for law and justice. He studied hard, dreaming of a day when he could return and change things for the better. After years of study, Jamal became a civil rights lawyer. He fought cases that helped many people who had been treated unfairly. His work earned respect, but he always remembered where he came from. 2 years ago, Jamal's mother became ill. He decided to move back home to care for her. It was a difficult decision because the town still held painful memories, but family came first. At the same time, Darren Klein's story had been unfolding in a very different way. Darren grew up in the same town, but his childhood was unlike Jamal's. He was the son of a police officer and had always believed that the law was absolute. From a young age, Darren was taught that some people were more dangerous than others, even if there was no proof. When Darren joined the police force, he carried those lessons with him. He quickly rose through the ranks, gaining a reputation for being tough and fearless. But beneath his proud exterior, Darren often acted on fear and bias rather than facts. His badge became a symbol not just of authority, but of control. He believed the town needed him to keep order, and he saw people like Jamal as threats to that order. Over the years, Darren had made many arrests, mostly targeting black men in the neighborhood. Some of those arrests had been based on weak evidence or personal judgment. Still, the town did not question him. He was the law. When Jamal was arrested, Darren saw another chance to assert his power. He believed that Jamal would be just another name on his list of convictions. He didn't know that Jamal was a lawyer or that Jamal was ready to fight back. Jamal thought about how different their paths had been, even though they had walked the same streets. He also thought about the many people who had suffered quietly under Darren's actions. The families who had lost fathers, brothers, and sons to unfair arrests. The young men who had been scared to speak up, the women who had watched their loved ones taken away with no justice. Jamal wanted to be their voice. He wanted to make sure that Darren's badge no longer meant fear. That night, Jamal received a call from Maya, the journalist who had recorded the arrest. "People are starting to pay attention," she said. "The story is growing beyond our town." Jamal smiled. "Good," he said. "This is not just about me. It's about all of us." They talked for a long time about the next steps. Jamal planned to dig deeper, to find more evidence of Darren's misconduct. The more Jamal learned, the clearer it became that this fight was bigger than just one arrest. Meanwhile, Darren was feeling the pressure too. His colleagues at the police station had begun to avoid him. Some whispered about the growing investigation. His superiors had started to question his past actions. Darren did not know how to respond. He was used to being untouchable. He did not understand how Jamal, the man he had arrested, was turning the tables. The two men lived in the same town, but their worlds were now worlds apart. Jamal looked out his window at the quiet streets of his childhood neighborhood. He thought about the children playing outside, the hopes they carried, and the changes that were coming. He felt a deep sense of responsibility. He was no longer just a man fighting for himself. He was a man fighting for justice, and he was ready. The morning of the hearing arrived with a gray sky hanging low over the town. Jamal Turner stood outside the courthouse, his heart steady, but his mind alert. Today was more than just a court case. It was the moment when the truth would begin to shine. Inside the courtroom, people from the town filled the benches. Some came out of curiosity, others out of support. The atmosphere buzzed quietly, filled with whispers and exchanged glances. Many had never seen a case like this before, where a man arrested by a police officer stood not as a suspect, but as a fighter for justice. Jamal's eyes met Maya's in the crowd. She gave him a small nod. The journalist had been working tirelessly to bring attention to the case. Together, they hoped their voices would be loud enough to make a difference. Judge Harris took his seat, his face serious. He called the court to order. Jamal began his statement. "Your Honor, this case is not only about me. It is about every person in our community who has ever been stopped, searched, or arrested without cause. It is about the right to be treated fairly and with respect by those sworn to protect us." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he continued, "Officer Darren Klein arrested me without evidence, without cause, and with a clear bias. Today, I will show that his actions are part of a larger pattern, one that cannot be ignored." The courtroom listened intently as Jamal called his first witness, a woman named Sarah, who worked at the local community center. Sarah spoke softly but with conviction. "I have seen Officer Klein stop young black men for no reason," she said. "Many of them live in fear of him. Some have lost jobs or been unable to find work because of arrests that never led to charges." Sarah's words echoed through the courtroom. Jamal then presented records he had obtained, reports of complaints against Darren that had been ignored or dismissed. The documents showed a troubling history of misconduct. Darren's lawyer tried to dismiss the evidence as hearsay. But Jamal was prepared. He brought forward more witnesses, neighbors, former officers, even a retired detective who admitted that Darren's actions had often been too aggressive and unfair. The turning point came when Jamal introduced a recording from another traffic stop made by a hidden camera. The video showed Darren yelling at a man who was clearly not resisting, using force that seemed unnecessary. The judge watched the footage closely, his face unreadable. Darren's confidence began to falter. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Jamal's calm but powerful presentation was changing the mood in the room. What had seemed like a simple case was now exposing a deep problem. After hours of testimony, the judge paused the session. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Reporters asked questions, and residents shared their thoughts. The case was no longer just a local story. It was a sign that something had to change. Jamal met with Maya in a quiet cafe nearby. They spoke about the day's progress and what still needed to be done. "We're making a difference," Maya said. "But Darren won't go down without a fight." Jamal nodded. "I know. But people are starting to see the truth. That's the most important thing." Back at the police station, Darren sat alone in his office. He stared at the papers in front of him, the complaints, the evidence, the growing list of witnesses. He realized his badge was no longer a shield. For the first time, Darren felt vulnerable. The investigation into his conduct had become serious. Internal Affairs was watching closely. Days later, Jamal received a phone call from a man named Mr. Edwards, a former officer who had resigned in protest years ago. Mr. Edwards offered to meet and share what he knew about Darren's past. When they met, Mr. Edwards spoke quietly but firmly. "Darren's behavior isn't new," he said. "He's built a reputation on fear and control. I left because I couldn't be part of it anymore." Jamal listened carefully, knowing this information could be important. As the case continued, Jamal worked tirelessly. He met with community leaders, held meetings, and spoke at local gatherings. The town was beginning to change its conversation, from fear and silence to hope and action. Meanwhile, Darren grew more isolated. His once loyal colleagues kept their distance, unsure of where they stood. One evening, Darren received a letter from his superior, an official notice that the department was opening a formal investigation into his conduct. Darren's world was shifting. But Jamal remained focused on the bigger picture. He wanted justice not only for himself, but for all those who had suffered. In his small apartment, Jamal sat at his desk, surrounded by papers and notes. He thought about the families who had lost loved ones, the young men afraid to walk the streets, the mothers who prayed for safety. He whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." The fight for truth was far from over, but the turning point had come. The town had begun to see, and Jamal was ready to lead. The town was changing. Slowly but surely, the story of Jamal Turner and Officer Darren Klein had begun to spread beyond the courthouse walls. What was once a quiet, almost invisible problem was now a loud conversation in homes, schools, and public places. Jamal woke early every day, his mind full of plans. He knew this was bigger than one case. It was about all the people who had felt powerless for too long. He spent hours talking to lawyers, community leaders, and families affected by police misconduct. Together, they began to build a stronger voice. At the police station, the atmosphere was tense. Officers whispered in hallways, eyes darting when Darren passed by. Even his closest friends were keeping their distance. The man who once felt untouchable was starting to feel the weight of doubt. Internal Affairs had opened a full investigation into Darren's actions. Officers who had once looked up to him were now being asked to share their own stories. Some spoke in support of Darren, but many revealed uncomfortable truths about his aggressive behavior and unfair arrests. Darren himself was growing restless. He found it harder to sleep, the stress eating at him. His confident mask cracked as he realized his past mistakes were catching up. One evening, Darren sat alone in his small apartment, staring at a pile of letters, complaints from citizens, reports from his colleagues, and official documents from the investigation. He couldn't ignore the growing evidence. "I never meant for it to go this far," he whispered to himself. But the truth was hard to accept. His actions had caused real harm, and now he faced consequences. Meanwhile, Jamal's story was gaining attention. Maya, the journalist, continued to report on the case with passion and fairness. She interviewed families affected by Darren's arrests and shared their voices with the public. In one interview, a young mother named Angela spoke quietly about her brother. who had been arrested without cause and lost his job. "It's not just about me or Jamal," she said. "It's about all of us who live in fear." Jamal watched the interview later and felt a deep sadness, but also a strong determination. He knew this fight was about more than his own experience. The courtroom battles continued. Jamal presented more evidence and witnesses. Each day, the pattern of Darren's misconduct became clearer. The judge listened carefully, and the town's support for Jamal grew. At the police station, Darren faced more pressure. His superiors called him in for meetings, warning him that his career was at risk. The once proud officer was now isolated and unsure of his future. One afternoon, a group of officers approached Darren. Their words were quiet but firm. "We can't keep protecting you if you keep putting the department at risk," one said. Darren nodded, feeling the loneliness settle over him. Outside the courthouse, community leaders held meetings to discuss police reforms. Jamal was invited to speak. He stood before the crowd and spoke with honesty and hope. "We must build a system where everyone is treated fairly," he said. "This case shows us what happens when power is used without justice." The crowd applauded. For many, this was the beginning of change. Back at home, Jamal received a letter from the judge. The court was preparing to announce a decision on Darren's actions. The moment was near. That night, Jamal thought about his mother's words from her letter, about hope, courage, and the strength to keep fighting. He knew that no matter what happened, the story would not end here. The next morning, Darren was called to the courthouse. The judge was ready to deliver the verdict on the misconduct charges. Darren sat quietly, his hands clenched. The courtroom was packed with people eager to hear the decision. The judge's voice was steady as he spoke. "Officer Darren Klein is found guilty of misconduct and abuse of power. This behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated." Gasps and whispers filled the room. The judge continued. "Officer Klein will be stripped of his badge and suspended from the force. Further federal charges may be pursued." Darren's face went pale. The badge that once made him feel untouchable was gone. The man who thought he could act without consequence was now facing the full weight of justice. Jamal felt a mixture of relief and sadness. This was a victory, but he knew healing would take time. As Darren was led away, many in the courtroom looked on quietly. Some felt justice had been served. Others felt the need to continue the fight for true equality. Outside, Maya reported live on the verdict. The town listened, feeling the shift in the air. Later, Jamal met with community members to plan the future. They spoke of new laws, better training for officers, and support for those affected by injustice. Jamal smiled, knowing this was only the beginning. The badge was gone, but the fight for justice was far from over. The day after the court's decision, the town felt different. A quiet but strong wave of change was moving through the streets. People talked openly about justice and fairness, about the right to live without fear. Jamal Turner woke early, feeling a mix of exhaustion and hope. The fight had been long and difficult, but today was a new beginning. He spent the morning visiting his mother. Her smile warmed his heart, and she told him how proud she was. "You have made a difference, Jamal. You gave us all a voice." Jamal smiled softly. "It's not just me, Mama. It's all of us together." In the days that followed, Jamal worked hard to build on the momentum. He met with community leaders, police officials, and young people eager to help change the town's future. At a town hall meeting, Jamal spoke with passion. "We need to work together, the police, the community, and the leaders. We must build trust and respect." The room was full of nodding heads and hopeful faces. Maya, the journalist, continued to cover the story. Her reports shared the voices of families affected by years of unfair treatment. People felt heard for the first time in a long while. Meanwhile, Darren Klein faced a very different reality. Without his badge, he was left to confront his past and the damage he had caused. He began attending counseling sessions and community meetings, slowly starting to understand the pain behind his actions. One afternoon, Darren met Jamal outside a community center. The air was tense but calm. "I want to say I'm sorry," Darren said quietly. "I didn't realize how much harm I caused." Jamal looked at him thoughtfully. "Apologies are a start, but actions matter more. This town needs real change." Darren nodded. "I want to be part of that change if you'll let me." It was a difficult moment, but also a hopeful one. Jamal believed that healing required honesty and effort from everyone. In the weeks that followed, the town saw new programs focused on police training and community support. Workshops taught officers about fairness, bias, and respect. Community members learned how to work alongside police for safety and justice. Jamal helped organize a youth mentoring program. He wanted young people to know their rights and to have hope for a better future. At one meeting, a teenage boy named Marcus spoke up. "I used to be scared of the police. Now I want to help make things better." Jamal smiled. "That's exactly why we're here." The town's schools began teaching lessons about respect and equality. Parents attended meetings, asking questions, and sharing their stories. Slowly, trust began to grow. But the road wasn't easy. Some people still held anger and fear. There were difficult conversations and disagreements. Jamal understood that healing was a process. One evening, Jamal walked through his old neighborhood. Children played in the street, laughing and free. Their smiles reminded him why he fought so hard. He stopped at a small park bench and sat down. The stars shone bright above, and he felt a quiet peace. "This is just the beginning," he whispered to himself. The town had faced its pain, and now it was ready to heal. Together. Months passed since the court's decision. The town that once lived in fear was slowly changing. Jamal Turner became a symbol of hope for many, but to him, the real victory was in the small, everyday moments when people began to believe in fairness. Again. Jamal spent his mornings at the community center, working with young people. They came with questions, hopes, and sometimes pain. He listened carefully and shared his story, not just of struggle, but of strength. One afternoon, a young girl named Lily approached Jamal. She was shy but determined. "Mr. Turner," she said softly, "I want to be a lawyer like you someday. I want to help people who don't have a voice." Jamal smiled warmly. "You can do it, Lily. You have the power to change the world." Outside the center, the town was waking up to a new reality. Police officers were attending training sessions, focused on respect and fairness. Many had started volunteering in community events, eager to rebuild trust. Even Darren Klein was working hard to make amends. Though he could no longer wear the badge, he volunteered at the youth program Jamal helped start. It was not easy for either of them, but they both understood that change needed courage from everyone. One evening, the town gathered for a peace watch. Hundreds of people walked together, carrying signs calling for justice and unity. The air was filled with music, laughter, and hope. Jamal spoke at the event. "This march is not just about what we have lost, but what we have gained. We have learned that justice is possible when we stand together." His words touched many hearts. The mayor announced plans to create a community advisory board to work closely with the police department. This group would include residents, officers, and leaders who cared deeply about fairness. For the first time in years, the town felt heard. At home, Jamal sat with his mother. She smiled, proud of the man he had become. "You've brought light to this town, Jamal," she said. He took her hand gently. "It's all of us together, Mama." Jamal knew that the road ahead would still have challenges. Old wounds don't heal overnight. But he also knew that the fight for justice was a journey, not a destination. One morning, as Jamal walked through the park, he saw children playing freely, their laughter echoing in the warm air. Parents watched, smiling, neighbors greeted each other with kindness. The town was healing. Jamal took a deep breath, feeling hope fill his heart. He thought about the past, the fear, the pain, the fight, and smiled softly. "This is a new beginning," he said quietly. "For me, for the town, for all of us." And with that, Jamal stepped forward, ready to keep building a future where justice and kindness would guide the way.